All right, so we are live in the continuation of the Conservation Stories Canada project partnership with Cape Breton Highlands National Park. Done two amazing interviews with some fantastic scientists, Jared Tommy and Sarah Penny from the amazing park over the last few weeks. And we're wrapping up today our three-part series with Clayton D'Orsay, who is a resource conservation officer in the park. Clayton, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Yeah, so I want to chat today about ecological monitoring. This is something that's come up in the other two broadcasts, and I want to see what it actually looks like to assess an ecosystem. What are the indicators that you're looking for when you go out on the land? How are you trying to sort of understand what's going on and how to make it better?
So with resource conservation, one of the main things that we do is the ecological monitoring of our parks and properties. So what we're looking there to do is assess the environmental health, basically, of the whole park. So to do that, ideally, to speak on the health of something, you'd look at the whole system. We look at everything, but as you might understand, when you're looking at 950 square kilometers of environment, that is impossible. So what we do is we break that down into different ecosystems. So in Cape Breton Highlands National Park, we are looking at our forested ecosystems, our freshwater aquatic ecosystems, as well as our wetlands. So those are our three ecosystems that we look at, and then within each one of those, we're looking at different indicators of their health. So we look at organisms, whether they're plants or animals, or perhaps abiotic or non-living components of the environment, to see how they're doing. And we're looking for specific species or specific qualities that are susceptible to change. So perhaps it's a bird or an amphibian that is sensitive to pollution or something like that. So if you're seeing very small numbers of those, or if they're completely absent, it might indicate that there's some sort of impairment or problem in the ecosystems. So they are an indicator of health.
Yeah. So this is like the canary in the coal mine approach. So what are those species that are in Cape Breton? Like, what are you going out and really looking for, and what is the status of those species? I'm really curious.
Right. So for the most part, a lot of our ecosystems are in fairly good condition. But we do look for species such as, which we'll talk about later, some of the nocturnal owls that are present in the park. So something like the boreal owl is associated with, as you might guess, boreal forests, and they require a good, intact, healthy forest to thrive and breed. We haven't seen very many numbers of those in the past many years. We do have an impairment in our boreal forests following a spruce budworm outbreak in the 1970s and early 80s. A lot of the boreal forest in the park is converted to grasslands, so the proper habitat for boreal owl is no longer there. We also look at something like the barred owl, which is a mixed and Acadian forest specialist, and they require large tracts of mature, healthy mixed wood and Acadian forest. So if you're seeing lots of them on the landscape, that forest is largely intact and healthy.
It makes me really happy to hear that owls are one of these species, because I'm obsessed with owls. I've only seen one in my entire life in the wild, and I'm constantly bugging friends and family to try and find places to go check them out. So the chance to get to do that for real science and not just because it's on a whim is pretty exciting. So with these forests, you mentioned that the problem was in the 70s and 80s, and I find it fascinating you mentioned sort of an infestation of something that wasn't meant to be there. I think Canadians are becoming very much more aware of the fact that whether it's beetles out in the west coast of Canada, these sort of invasive species can really wreak havoc on an ecosystem. So what's happening now is that infestation cleared? Are we bringing the forest back? What's actually happening in Cape Breton Highlands?
So this is a slightly different situation, in which case the spruce budworm is actually a native species, but they have a biology that is kind of a boom or bust sort of population dynamic. So they have outbreaks, and it's on usually about a 40-year cycle, and we are currently in that period again. So the last infestation started, I think, somewhere around 1974 and wrapped up in somewhere around 82 or so. and they cause major damage to the adult trees. And it's a normal cycle for the boreal forest to have these infestations, knock down the adult trees and have the new forest come up underneath it.
Yeah.
But there was a disruption to the regeneration of the forest, and it hasn't recovered in that time frame. So it's now converted to a grassland instead of forest.
I love that our conversation took us here, because this is fascinating to me. I know, Parks Canada conversations in the past, I've had the chance to chat with Banff, and the fire management plan there was so different in the past, and now they intentionally light fires to help make sure that the ecosystem can recuperate. So as Parks Canada, you guys are in this ecosystem that goes through this natural cycle, but it's been disrupted. So how do you balance that? How do you decide what to do with these insects that are a natural part of the landscape that naturally change the forest in this way, but then human impacts have made it so that it doesn't come back in the same, like, what do you do? I don't know. Do you guys know what to do?
Yeah. So that is part of the point of doing the monitoring and understanding the dynamics of the environment and the cycles of the species and processes on the landscape. With the knowledge that we have of the impairments and the processes that are involved, that will inform how we conduct park management going forward, and whether or not we are attempting any kind of restoration processes or similar.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned park management. I noticed when I chatted with Parks Canada groups across Canada that above every other site, coast to coast, you guys are really keen on highlighting that trails are meant to be stayed on. So the human impact doesn't extend beyond the areas that Parks Canada set aside for people to enjoy it. Right. So I'm curious how you balance that in the park, because you're fairly remote on a Canadian scale. And so I'm curious, as more and more people want to enjoy these spaces, how do you navigate that sort of boundary between human enjoyment and making sure that the ecosystem is intact going forward in the years to come, especially if it's a delicate ecosystem that's changing all the time? Is there a magic formula for that, or are we navigating that together?
There is an awful lot of discussion that goes into that process, and ideally, it's all evidence-based. So what we're doing in resource conservation, with particularly with these impacts and species impacts, is gathering that data so that we can make an informed decision going forward. But that's not the only thing that goes into the decision-making process. There's also, as you mentioned, the needs of the visitors to experience things, as well as having the ability to experience those things for an educational component for understanding why they need to be protected and why the parks exist, basically, along with other aspects of economics and the like. So lots goes into the decision making process, not just the ecological conditions or events.
Yeah, but I think it's really heartening for people to hear that there is this evidence-based backdrop. We want to make sure that we're not degrading these ecosystems in centuries to come, and I think Parks Canada does just a fantastic job of that. So it's really exciting to get to share these this balance in the story and sort of how Parks builds up its approach going forward. In general, Clayton, I'm really curious. One thing I didn't have a chance to chat about with the other two colleagues of yours at Cape Breton Highlands is how you got into this. Like, what was the driver for you personally to get into this field?
Right. So I've always kind of been interested in nature. As a kid, I was an avid bird watcher and fishing and all that sort of stuff. And I loved watching those nature shows on TV. David Attenborough can really push a person in a direction if they're inclined at all. So and then having access to I'm from Cape Breton, so I've had access to places like Cape Breton Highlands National Park, and we camping as a kid and exploring the woods and all the creatures that are there. Just kind of pushed me in that direction. So yeah.
This is really interesting to me, because you are the living embodiment of this balance that Parks is trying to navigate. And so you grew up, you had the chance to camp there, you had the chance to go there. For me in Ontario, it was Algonquin Provincial Park, a few hours north of me in Toronto. And that really had a huge impact on me growing up. And so I'm curious now, as an ecologist, are there things that you notice or do differently because of your scientific background and training that change how you perceive the landscape, I guess, in a big way?
I mean, yes. Enumerating them is a little bit of a challenge because they're just kind of part of how I navigate walking around and seeing things. But a lot of it comes down to seeing those connections between things around us. So it can be somewhat eye-opening to see how fish health might affect the forest health, particularly out west where there's the salmon runs and things like bears and wolves pulling the salmon out into the forest. All those nutrients that were pulled in the ocean are distributed out across the land.
One of my favorite things I've ever discovered in science as a kid is that you can trace the nutrients in like trees in this beautiful, amazing forest, and they come from fish that come from the ocean. I mean, that is the coolest ecosystem connection, I think on the planet. Are there things like that? I mean, I chatted with Sarah about salmon running up the rivers there. Do you see that sort of impact? I mean, personally, maybe not that specific example, but are there? I don't know.
Yes, they exist here as well. In these specific sort of displays of the salmon thing, we don't have the same numbers and the same biology with our salmon as in the West. So a lot of ours will actually return to ocean after spawning and come back again, whereas a lot of the Pacific are to see, come back, spawn, and die. So the ecology is different, so you get a different influx of materials, but they are bringing lots into the aquatic systems as well that doesn't necessarily make it onto the land. But you also see a lot of transport just on the wind of like seaweed into the forest and stuff like that, where you and salts and everything else. So it's all connected.
I guess my first favorite connection that I learned about as a kid was this, like the Sahara Desert, the sands from it blow across the Atlantic Ocean and fertilize the forest of the Amazon. I mean, that is it's as mind-blowing to me today as it was when I was like 5. I mean, it's just such a cool story. So I've never heard of seaweed ending up in the forest. That's so cool to me. I want to wrap up with just your favorite part of all this. You're clearly so passionate about this. The story of you growing up on the land, coming back to actually get there to work in this role is so exciting and inspiring. Is there a thing that you enjoy the most? Is it building together those stories, that evidence to highlight how we can preserve the ecosystem? Is it being out in the field looking for owls or helping make sure that the ecosystem is healthy? What is it that really does it?
I mean, it's a combination of it all, really. I didn't really assume that I'd be able to make use of the education that I gained and the experiences that I loved as a kid to kind of pull it all together in a career, and one that's so dynamic. Like we're looking at water chemistry, we're looking at the distribution of owls, we're looking at how many moose are on the landscape, we're looking at all kinds of different things. So it's always a new challenge, and you get to bring in those perspectives from how things are connected, and really changes how or enhances the experience of the whole process.
Every time I talk to someone from Parks Canada, you guys are just the most thrilled people to have the job that you do. I mean, there's so much sort of reverence for this ability to do this role, and it's so exciting. So I couldn't think of a better place than that. Clayton, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it, and it's so exciting to hear all these amazing stories of what's going on in such a special place in Canada. Thank you so much.
Thank you.